Hi, this is Anastasia Jagerman. We're back with the Optimum Tide, and we are back down the rabbit hole with my repeat guest, Erin McClintock. I'm so glad you came back. And today we're going to do Follow the White Rabbit. And we might get lost in the White Rabbit because we're going to talk about mental illness today. It's a topic that is really currently an epidemic in the United States, and not only in the United States, in North America, dare I say. And recently I've been attending several seminars and conferences. Well, the last 3 I've attended. Everybody in the room is talking about anxiety and depression. And, we could rewind the recorder and go all the way back to pre-COVID numbers. And because, we know COVID didn't help. That we know. That for sure. And other reinsurers in the room also piped up because that said, by the way, we're changing our anxiety and our mood disorder section in our manual. And I'm sure other providers will do so. Other reinsurers will do so. And so like pre-COVID, we knew that our numbers weren't the greatest. And we have surveys about this and survey Americans per month of the year. As we know, the winter months are worse than others. But the numbers were always in the 10 and 15% that qualified for generalized anxiety disorder and depression, which is not that great. But post-COVID, those numbers essentially doubled, if not more. So I want to talk today about depression, and especially let's talk about what's been more recently in the news with younger age. Yeah. Males and females. So what have you seen out there, Erin, that's causing you to pause and think about what's going on?
Well, thank you for having me back. I'm very excited to be part of this one. And, especially this, I love the fact that we call this the rabbit hole, because it is absolutely something that can go in all these crazy directions when you're, and sorry about the word there, that usage. But there's many things when you're looking at the younger generations, and to be quite frank, all generations, if we're really going to be honest. So if you're looking at really statistically, young men under the age group of 30, when they started interviewing young men under 30 in the 1990s, some men were, like 3 to 5% of men were saying that they were lonely. They didn't have any really good solid foundation of friends. And, just last year, another study that was done, that's now 15% to 20%. And that's a really high number, especially when you're looking at, a lot of young men who we could argumentatively say, because of having the world at your fingertips through your phone, that you could probably make more connections with people through communities, through, friends across the globe. But it's a really interesting fact that there's a lot more men that are struggling with loneliness that's impacting their depression, that's impacting mental health. And more importantly, I think what I'm most excited about in a weird, twisted kind of way is that they're vocalizing it. Because when you look back over generations, men have always kept this to very close to their heart, right? Yes. They don't speak about it because they don't want to seem...
It was always a woman's issue.
It was a woman's issue. They didn't want to seem weak. Right. They were supposed to be masculine. They were supposed to be strong, sturdy rocks, right? And if you came out and you said that you had some sort of a mental health issue, you were deemed like, a wuss. Like, we could use all the negative words that we really don't want to say out loud, right?
Exactly.
But you're starting to see the shift in younger generations that are coming out and actually talking about it. And they're talking about it not only from women, but from men everywhere. And they're seeking help. And that's a huge thing, because not only are they going, either through Zoom into therapist, or they're going into the, actual like practicing offices, they're utilizing apps to help with their mental health. But it's how are we taking that, especially from a younger generational aspect, thinking that this is right now an underwriting your snapshot in time that we're underwriting and basing you off of. Our hopes is that the treatments you're taking, either through, therapeutics or through therapy, you're going to get better and come back and be able to apply for better rates. But it's not shocking to me that reinsurers in the long run are looking at more mortality studies, and especially with the impacts of COVID, because it's not just when you think life insurance, we have a tendency to think of age groups 18 and older.
Yes.
But juveniles. And much, much younger. And you're starting to see societal pressure from social media impacting age groups such as like 8 and above. And, I'm part of a carrier that does sell a lot of juvenile business because of the distributions that we sell to.
Yes.
So we are seeing a lot more in the younger ages, and we're postponing where previously we had it. And I think this is one of the unknown and explored areas that I have a feeling we're going to be digging into a lot more.
And I think that's the safe thing that you're saying, that to postpone, because I've had like recently a claim, and this person wasn't that young, but in a younger age group. I can only speak my stepdaughter, who is 27 years old. She recently, during COVID, unfortunately, one of her friends committed suicide. And we hear that suicide is on the rise for younger men, and he was a younger man, and it was unfortunately violent. It was a gunshot wound to the head. And so it was very traumatic for their group. Yeah. And what I appreciate the most, and I have goosebumps when I'm telling this, because it's cognitive behavior therapy, because talk is not cheap. Right. Talk is super, super important in that age group, in all age group.
Right.
Okay. And we kind of like, from an underwriting standpoint, when we used to see cognitive behavior therapy, I know in my olden days, my golden years, let's just say, it was kind of pushed over. I was, this is like some soft kind of therapy, because you want to see people on medication and you want to see them, controlled and the healthcare system. And now I'm really going down the rabbit hole between Canada and the US is completely different. So we won't address that. But cognitive behavior therapy is key. And like you're saying, more and more people are coming out and speaking about their issues. So we've recently had a claim, and a lady that applied for coverage, and it's really about critical thinking. And we know that we talk about critical thinking. It's been a buzzword recently, or in the last 5 years, with the venue of all these data coming in and out, and no longer using traditional ways of underwriting to have the ability to point out the favorable and the unfavorable factors. And just as a public service message to all the underwriters out there, I really recommend that you read some of the paragraphs in the manual section, and not just necessarily go to the rating section. And that's for all the reinsurance manuals, because there's a lot of verbiage there that kind of gives you clues when you're assessing mental illness. Right. Because sometimes, like in this particular claim in question, it was between a standard rating to a postponed rating. And the physician, the way he kept talking about his patient during his APS was mild to moderate, mild to moderate. But every visit that she had that was recent to the time of underwriting, he kept tweaking her medication. He kept removing one medication, introducing another medication, changing one SSRI for another SNRI. So you could tell that he was trying to figure out what would make her feel better. And she wasn't a big complainer, which, no surprise, women tend to not complain as much, especially maybe for mental illnesses. But I'm using this lady as a case because it's a true case. We actually saw it. And the underwriter missed a few flags. Affordability on the product. This lady had 2 jobs. She was a manager in a Burger King, and she was also a nurse's aide in a hospital. And when you dig in at claim times, you dissect everything, pardon the pun, you realize that, the premium affordability was way too high. It was greater than 30% of her income. So you're like, okay, well, why is she getting a policy like that? And then you discover another tidbit during the file is that she lost her husband. And grief is an enormous process to go through. And the doctor also, again, downplayed it. Yep. Said, she's going through a grief process. Her husband passed 5 months ago. We don't know of what. There was no mention of what he passed of. And he says she's got a great support system in place. And then the other flag in the file was that she told you that she changed her drinking habit. So it generated a questionnaire. The questionnaire, again, was somewhat inefficient in the way it asked the question, but what you could decipher is that she was drinking more on the weekends. She was telling you she didn't drink regularly, but she drank Thursday, Fridays, and Saturdays. Okay. And then she says, well, I've discontinued that because I'm so busy also at work, and I'm only drinking now on Saturdays, and I might be drinking, 5 to 6 drink. This considered binge drinking.
Right.
Okay. And then there's another issues with females and LFTs. We'll go there. We'll go there also. That's another segue and another whole. Anyways, all this to say that she said all that, and the underwriters, in her infinite wisdom, whatever, categorized they're mild, because we tend to have seen depression in our industry. I remember underwriting cases, and I've been underwriting for 30 plus years. So I remember seeing cases, and I used to take a way more cautious approach in the early 90s. And then we kind of faded away in this process that now we're saying, shoot, there might be Lexapro 10 in the drinking water we drink, right? Because it's so prevalent that everybody's anxious, everybody's depressed. So now we've kind of minimized it, where we shouldn't have. So I'm sure we will see new sections coming out, but I want your opinion on what you think would be like a favorable outlook or unfavorable outlook. Like, what are your pointers when you're looking at depression and anxiety?
I think this is where, obviously we're very much used to having prescription history, right? So if you see one medication and it's stabilized for years, they're doing really, really well. Right. Or hell, even if they're decreasing it, they're doing really, really well.
Yeah, that's a good sign.
But to your point, in the case that you were mentioning, when it's changing all over the place, it's just like how you would assess hypertension, right? It's like if the medications are changing all over the place, it's the doctor's trying to find the rhythm and rhyme that makes this person feel the best that they can possibly feel. There was something that you said when you were telling the case that was a bit of a light bulb moment for me. Was you said the doctor downplayed the grief.
Yes.
And you were using a pronoun for the doctor as he.
Yes.
Right?
It was a he.
So it was a he doctor.
It was a he doctor.
So, yes. And it started making me really, really think is that, anytime there's a difference between men and women and how they process grief, right? Mm-hmm. You of all people, I know the story grief for, a long time, but women have a tendency, no matter what happens in large life events, they take a long time to process. Mm-hmm. If it's a grief, they can take 12 plus more months to digest and unpack it all. Leaving a relationship, or if they ended it on their own terms or it was not on their own terms, they take time to reflect and digest. Men, however, don't always follow that same path.
So true.
So men, you've seen men who are in their 40s, their 50s or 60s, they lose their partner due to an illness or an accident for 20 years. And the next thing you know, like 2 or 3 months later, they're dating somebody else. And so some of the family members are like, what is this person doing? And could you say that they haven't entirely processed their grief? You can't really make that assumption, but there's a lot of that there. So when you're saying he downplayed the grief, a little bit of me was like, was that his own little bit of bias that he would be processed over the grief of 5 months? Right. Versus what she would be.
Well, one of the producers of this show, his dad, actually, and I won't name any names, but he told us the story, and I was flabbergasted. I think it was a span of not even a few months. And one of the producers, like I said that he called her his lady friend. His lady friend? I'm like, my goodness. And they were married for, I don't know, 40, 50 years. I don't know the exact number of years, but it's like, men definitely process grief differently.
And, it's kind of going back to what we were talking about in the women's podcast series. Like, women are generally more domestic, like a little bit more of caretakers. I mean, you even said something talking about, the young gentleman who violently committed suicide.
Yeah.
Men don't think of the cleanup. Women do. Mm-hmm. So when you look at how women kill themselves, it's generally on a bed with pills or in a tub because it's an easy cleanup.
Yeah.
It's statistically rare to find a woman who kills herself
violently.
But men don't think that way. And it's a very interesting thing when you start
You
to
bring
peel
a
back
good
the
point.
layers.
Yeah, no, you bring a very good point.
Layers of like how we're just so wired differently, right? But then how does that makes it so much more further complex in an underwriting world, right? Because like we don't want to genderize, like you
don't want to
mental
discriminate
health
against the sex because we're not, even though we're a professional discriminator.
Exactly.
At best we are, but these are like long-standing issues, like and to go back with the grief, I mean, we have some in the manual at times. Like at one point I remember when a spouse, and we used to do that, I mean, maybe they still have some, but I'm dating myself, but in the olden days, if you were 70 and above,
that's
and you
when we
lost
care.
Right, and you lost the spouse, we had an obligatory period of postponement of 1 year to before you consider coverage.
What? Because it was like broken heart syndrome, where it was almost like where the red fern grows. Once one passes away, the other one will too as well.
Exactly.
And so
exactly.
And then, but again,
I have goosebumps again. But I will tell you, when my husband passed away, I mean, it really changes an individual. When especially you're a caregiver for this person, and this lady was a caregiver for her husband. I don't know what he died of, but this is a significant impact. Right. I will tell you that my thoughts were very, very dark, and for a very long time, I wouldn't have insured myself. But I mean, will tell you that.
And the honest truth is, when we look at our applications, the way that we file, the way that we process, we don't really call out grief. We allow the insured to give us that information. Yeah. And when we're looking at, alternative data, we can only interpret it so far, right? Especially when it comes to mental health. And that's one of the things that, again, when you're watching like medication dosages and the names of them, if they're tracking the same, you feel very, very confident, right? Oh. But when the story starts changing, or you feel like there's a gaping hole, mental health becomes a different avenue to underwrite. Yeah. And it's very, very challenging. And I think that's, we brought up very briefly the liver enzymes, right?
Yes.
We're seeing a high increase of liver enzymes in women.
Yeah.
And
like this
in their 30s.
Yeah, this particular lady, what happened is, I mean, I can't prove it, but she drank herself essentially to death. And how they found her, it was her daughter that found her in the backseat of her car, in the back of her regular bar that she attended. And the daughter brought the mother at the hospital, and there was not enough time to save her. And she ingested 10 times the amount of a normal person can ingest for alcohol, mixed with the SSRIs.
Yeah.
And she didn't make it. And now, of course, we paid the insurance, the claim, obviously, but they had many subtle flags there that we didn't see, that the underwriter at the time didn't see. And I will tell you that now my eyes are like, not that they weren't wide open before, but they are even more open now, especially with these factors and these favorable and unfavorable factors, which brings us to drugs and therapy. We talked about SSRIs and their effectiveness and their lack thereof effectiveness. Right. Because like you said, it's like controlling blood pressure. Yeah. It's a very delicate mix. Like what Effexor does for one person might cause terrible nightmares for another one.
Exactly.
So it is very hard to find that perfect cocktail of effectiveness with medication. And I don't want to quote numbers, but they say that SSRIs are essentially ineffective at 60+%. So come in the CBT, the cognitive behavior therapy, and come in maybe the alternative form of treatments, which we won't have time today to discuss, but I'm sure that we could probably do another podcast on, approved treatment, for example, for ketamine and controlled setting, which is an FDA approved drug, and some of the, psilocybin treatment and microdosing. But like I said, that's another whole different rabbit hole. My favorite rabbit hole, maybe not my favorite, but let's correct that. Some of my most interesting, because I'm just fascinated by the way the brain works and by the way we can, as humans, really communicate with each other and really alleviate, because we all have our same anxiety. We all want to do good. We all want to perform good. We all want to be a good parent, whether it's to a cat, to a dog, or to a human, to a kid, and we all want to function well. So we all have so many similarities. I know this is sounding very spiritual and very out there right now, but we are really humans, and we all have the same flaws.
We do. And I think that's a great call out. And, especially as we're looking, it's so hard because I feel like this is one where your biases can come in quite strong as an individual human. Whereas, you can have certain people who are like, everybody who's depressed sits on the couch and eats some bonbons. And it's like, we know that's not true, but not for everybody. But then the thing too is that when you're looking at, my generation and Gen Z, openly talking about your mental health is so much more acceptable.
Good. I'm happy to hear that.
Me too. I'm very, very happy to hear it. But then it's almost from an underwriting perspective, even on the morbidity side, right?
Right.
We have to have this like a little bit of like raise our own eyebrows and have a little bit of caution that comes into this play, because what we may perceive as something to be very, very mild, like in your case with the claim, there's a lot more detail, and maybe who knows what happened in that particular case. We all know there's multiple factors that go into underwriting between, time service, partnership, blah, blah, blah. But it is something that we have to be very, very careful of. And I'm a big fan of it. I am calling out your own biases. And it's something that I do think that generationally we are going to start seeing a little bit more, where it's like, oh, well, I have anxiety and I'm okay, therefore everybody else is. And I don't think it's going to be that extreme where somebody's going to put that in an underwriting note. At least I hope not. But, I do think that there is going to be a little bit that does play in, just because it's becoming a wee bit more normalized. Mm-hmm. Not completely. No. But I think that's just kind of my cautionary tale is we have to watch this a little bit more, because it's impacting so many more generations, especially as everybody's evolving.
Yeah. And I mean, the numbers will tell. It will take us a while to get there, but hopefully the numbers will tell, and hopefully the numbers go down. That's all I can wish for.
Yeah. I think we're almost close to time, right?
Yeah, we are. I think we're done.
So I think we got to a portion of the rabbit hole.
Yeah, we caught the rabbit. The rabbit is caught. So, and anyways, we'll stop here. Thank you for joining me again today.
Thank you so much for letting me come. Thank you so much for hosting me. I've had an absolute pleasure doing these podcasts and having these open conversations. Sometimes they're tough, but we got to have them, right?
It's important. Thank you.
Exactly. Thank you
so much.